The house was louder than usual. Not chaotic, not messy, just carefully loud. The kind of noise that comes from people trying too hard to create the illusion of happiness. Laughter that lasted a second too long. Conversations layered over each other just enough to avoid silence. I stood outside the door for a moment, holding a small box in my hands. It wasn't expensive, it wasn't impressive, but it was thoughtful. At least, I thought it was. That used to matter to me. I took a breath and stepped inside. The warmth hit me first, the smell of food, the brightness of the room, the soft decorations placed with intention. Everything looked perfect, exactly the way it always did. And just like always, I felt out of place the second I walked in. "Oh, you made it." The tone wasn't welcoming. It wasn't even surprised. It was just acknowledged. A few heads turned briefly. Eyes scanned me quickly, then moved on like nothing important had entered the room. I gave a small nod, closing the door behind me quietly. "I brought something," I said, lifting the box slightly. No one asked what it was. No one really cared. "Just put it somewhere," came the response from across the room. I walked toward the table, placing it gently among dishes that looked far more impressive. Perfectly arranged, carefully presented. Mine didn't match. It never did. I took a seat at the edge of the table, the one that always seemed to be left open. Not reserved, just available. Like me. Conversations continued without interruption. "So everything's going really well right now," someone said, leaning forward with excitement. "Big things happening." "Of course they are," another voice replied. "That's what happens when you stay focused." Soft agreement followed. Nods. Smiles. I stayed quiet, not because I had nothing to say, but because I knew how it would go. Eventually, someone would turn to me, not out of interest, but out of obligation. And right on time, it happened. "So, what about you?" one of the guests asked, offering a polite smile. "What have you been up to lately?" The table grew just slightly quieter. Not enough to seem obvious, but enough to make it clear that my answer was about to become entertainment. "I've been working," I said calmly. A small pause. "Working on what exactly?" they asked. Before I could respond, "Oh, you know," my brother cut in, leaning back in his chair with a relaxed smile. "Same as always. Ideas, plans, nothing concrete." A few people laughed softly. I didn't react. I had learned that lesson a long time ago. "Still figuring things out?" someone added. I nodded once. "Something like that." "Wow," another voice said lightly. "Must be nice to have that kind of flexibility." It sounded harmless, but it wasn't. "Yeah," my brother added, smirking slightly. No pressure, no expectations, just floating. More laughter. This time, louder. I focused on my plate. The food in front of me looked perfect. I couldn't taste any of it. "Everyone has their own pace," someone said, trying to balance the moment. "Of course," my brother replied smoothly. "Some people just take longer to start." The words landed clean, too clean, like they had been said before. Because they had. Different day, different setting, same message. I picked up my fork, keeping my movements steady. Because that's what they expected. Control, silence, acceptance. The conversation moved on, but the tone had shifted. Every now and then, another comment would slip in. Subtle, controlled, perfectly placed. Still working from home? Still exploring options? Still trying things out? Each question sounded polite. Each one carried the same weight. Not success, not progress, just delay. Halfway through dinner, my brother leaned forward slightly, resting his arms on the table. "You know what's interesting?" he said, looking around as if sharing something thoughtful. "Some people think effort alone is enough." A few people nodded. "But effort without results," he continued, glancing briefly in my direction, "doesn't really count, does it?" Silence followed. Then, a quiet laugh. Then another. And just like that, it spread. Not everyone joined, but no one stopped it. I sat there, letting it pass over me. Because reacting would only confirm what they already believed. That I was sensitive. That I couldn't handle it. That I didn't belong. "You're quiet," someone pointed out. I looked up slightly. "Just listening." "To what?" my brother asked, smiling. I met his gaze for a second. "Everything." That got a small reaction. Not laughter this time. Just curiosity. But it didn't last. It never did. The moment shifted again, pulled back into safer conversations, careers, achievements, future plans. Things I was never really part of. And yet, somehow, always included in just enough to be reminded. I leaned back slightly, letting the noise fade into the background. And for the first time that night, something inside me changed. Not anger, not embarrassment, something quieter, something clearer. I stopped trying to fit into the version of me they had already decided on. Because the truth was simple. They didn't know anything about me. Not really. They only knew what I had allowed them to see. And maybe that was about to change. I glanced toward the door without thinking. Just a habit. Just a moment. But something about it felt different. Like the night hadn't finished unfolding yet. Like something was still coming. I didn't know what. I didn't need to. Because for the first time, I wasn't waiting for their approval anymore. I was just waiting. And somehow, that felt different. The room hadn't changed. The same voices, the same laughter, the same carefully balanced conversations. But something underneath it had. I could feel it. Not in the way people spoke, but in the way I heard them now. Every comment that used to sting, didn't. Every glance that used to make me shrink, didn't. It was subtle, but it was real. And once you notice that shift, you can't go back. "You're really quiet tonight," someone said again, this time with a hint of curiosity instead of mockery. I looked up, meeting their eyes calmly. Just taking everything in. My brother leaned back slightly, watching me now with more attention than before. "That's new," he said. "Usually you have something to say." "I still do," I replied. "Then say it," he challenged lightly, smiling like it was all a joke. For a moment, the table waited. Not because they cared, but because they expected something awkward. Something easy to dismiss. I didn't give them that. Instead, I picked up my glass, taking a slow sip before setting it down again. "I don't think I need to," I said simply. That landed differently. Not loud, not dramatic, but enough to interrupt the rhythm of the room. My brother's smile didn't disappear, but it changed. Just slightly. "Interesting," he said. And then, as if to regain control of the moment, he stood up. "All right," he announced, lifting his glass. "Since we're all here, I think it's the perfect time." Everyone quieted down instantly. Of course they did. This was his space. His moment. "I just want to say how grateful I am," he continued, looking around the table. "For the support, the encouragement, and for the people who actually push forward instead of standing still." A few nods. A few approving smiles. Then, his eyes shifted toward me again. "And for reminding me what not to become." The words were calm, controlled, almost polite, but they carried more weight than anything said before. A couple of people laughed. Not loudly, but enough. Enough to make it clear where I stood. I didn't move, didn't react, didn't defend, because something inside me had already made its decision. I wasn't playing that role anymore. The one they had written for me. The one I had been quietly performing for years. I just sat there. And for the first time, my silence didn't feel like weakness. It felt like control. My brother raised his glass slightly higher. "To progress," he said. "To progress," a few voices echoed. Glasses clinked. The moment passed. Or at least, that's what they thought. I placed my hands lightly on the table, steady, relaxed. And that's when the doorbell rang. It wasn't loud, but it cut through everything. A clean, sharp interruption. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned. My brother frowned slightly. Were we expecting someone else? No one answered. A brief pause. Then footsteps. Someone got up, walking toward the door. The rest of us waited. At first, it was just quiet. Then, murmurs. A low voice at the entrance. Another responding. And then, silence. Not the casual kind. Not the kind you ignore. The kind that makes you listen. The kind that shifts something before you even know what's happening. Footsteps returned. Slow. Measured. And when the figure stepped into the room, the energy changed instantly. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Just undeniably. The person didn't rush. Didn't hesitate. They simply walked in with a level of calm that didn't match the room. And somehow, that calm took control of everything. My brother straightened slightly. "Hey," he said, forcing a polite tone. "I think you might have the wrong place." No response. Not immediately. The person's gaze moved across the table. Not scanning. Not searching. Just observing. And then, it stopped. On me. That alone was enough to break something in the room. Because for the first time that night, someone wasn't looking at me like I didn't belong. They were looking at me like I did. "I'm here for you," they said. Simple. Direct. No explanation. My brother let out a small laugh, clearly uncomfortable now. "Sorry, I think there's been some kind of mix-up." "There hasn't," the person replied calmly. My sister leaned forward slightly. "We're actually in the middle of something." "I can see that," they said. Still calm. Still controlled. And still not looking away from me. That made it worse. For them. "What exactly is this about?" My brother asked, his tone tightening just a little. The person took a step closer to the table. Then another. No rush. No hesitation. They reached into a bag and pulled out a thin folder. Clean. Simple. Nothing dramatic. But the way they placed it on the table, right in front of me, changed everything. "This is for you," they said. No one spoke. Because suddenly, no one knew what to say. My brother's smile faded slightly. "What is that?" I didn't answer. Because I already knew. Or at least, I understood enough. "Go ahead," the person said quietly. "You can open it." For a split second, the entire room held its breath. Waiting. Expecting. Judging. But this time, it didn't matter. I reached forward. My hands steady. My expression calm. And slowly, I opened the folder. The paper inside was smooth. Organized. Precise. Official. The kind of document that didn't need explanation. Still, no one at the table understood it yet. I read the first line. Then the second. And by the third, everything they believed about me had already started to fall apart. "What is it?" my brother asked, his voice tighter now. I didn't answer immediately. Not because I couldn't, but because for the first time, I didn't feel the need to rush. The person standing beside the table spoke instead. "It's a finalized transfer," they said calmly. "Transfer of what?" someone asked. A brief pause. Then, control. The word didn't sound loud. But it hit harder than anything that had been said all night. My brother let out a short laugh, but it didn't sound confident anymore. "Control of what exactly?" The person turned slightly, addressing the room without raising their voice. "The division that was just celebrated," they said. "It's no longer under its previous leadership." Silence. Real silence. Not awkward. Not temporary. Heavy. "What do you mean, no longer?" my sister asked, her voice no longer steady. "It means," the person continued, "the controlling stake has been reassigned." My brother shook his head. "That's not possible. It already happened," came the calm reply. He looked at me now. Not with amusement. Not with superiority. With uncertainty. "Say something," he said. So I did. "It's done." 2 simple words. But they carried everything. "How?" he asked. I closed the folder gently, placing my hand over it. Quietly. That answer didn't satisfy him. It wasn't supposed to. "You don't just get control of something like that," he pressed. "No," I agreed. "You don't." Another pause. "Unless you've been building toward it the entire time." That was the moment. The exact moment everything shifted. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But permanently. Weeks of quiet work. Months of decisions. All the time they thought I was figuring things out. I wasn't lost. I was focused. They just never looked close enough to see it. You're serious? My mother said softly. Yes. How long? She asked. I met her eyes. Long enough to stop explaining. No one laughed this time. No one added a comment. Because there was nothing left to reduce. Nothing left to question. The version of me they had created didn't exist anymore. And they were seeing that in real time. My brother leaned back slowly, trying to process it. Why didn't you tell anyone? I held his gaze. Would it have mattered? He didn't answer. Because deep down, he already knew. The room stayed quiet, not because there was nothing to say, but because no one knew how to say anything anymore. The balance had shifted, completely. The person beside me stepped back slightly. If there are any questions, they said, they can be handled professionally. Then they looked at me. You're in control now. Simple, direct, final. They turned and walked toward the door. No drama, no pause, just quiet certainty. The door closed behind them, and the room stayed still. I looked around the table one last time. The same people, the same faces, but no longer the same power. Because for the first time, they weren't deciding who I was. I stood up slowly. No rush, no anger, no need to prove anything further. I should get going, I said. No one stopped me, not because they didn't want to, but because they didn't know how. That silence, that was the loudest moment of the entire night. I walked toward the door, each step lighter than the one before. Not because I had won something, but because I had finally stopped needing anything from them. I reached the door, pausing just for a second. Not to look back, but to understand something clearly. Respect was never going to come from explaining myself. It only came when the truth no longer needed permission to exist. I stepped outside. The air felt different, clearer, quieter, and for the first time in a long time, I felt exactly where I was supposed to be. The next morning, everything moved forward. Meetings were scheduled, structures adjusted, decisions made, calmly, professionally, without noise, because real authority doesn't announce itself. It reveals itself. And sometimes, the most powerful moment isn't when everyone is speaking. It's when no one can.